of over 80 different nonprofits and organizations that support zoning reform for a variety of reasons. We believe that better zoning laws can not only lead to a more equitable and sustainable Connecticut, we believe it can lead to a Connecticut that's more green and economically vibrant as well. And these things are all connected. So here's a brief overlay of the various groups that are within our coalition. They advise us, they've helped us draft policy, they've helped us connect with legislators as well as people within their own communities. Because as much as what's happening in Hartford is important, it's just as important to engage people through local organizing, which Emily has been leading for the past several months. Now, here highlighted are some of the organizations that you might be familiar with that are environmentalist in nature. And we believe that they're signing on to our coalition is really reflective of how zoning and restrictive zoning particularly really negatively hurts the environment, contributes to global warming and a host of other issues. We believe that we need to build affordable homes to disrupt our current affordability crisis. It's created so much racial segregation and economic segregation, but we also believe that it's essential to make sure that these homes be environmentally friendly and to benefit Connecticut in a way that our current zoning laws simply do not. So now I'll talk a bit about land use and the environment. So just a bit of background, we see that restrictive zoning certainly has hurt the environment. You know, by mandating that large lots be built, by mandating that single family homes should exclusively be built, this increases energy costs, increases sprawl, and thereby accelerates climate change. We know that Connecticut is not immune to the effects of climate change, especially because we have quite a large shoreline, if you haven't noticed. And we know that if we don't act now, it might be too late in a couple of years. So we're really eager this session to be advocating for green pro-homes policies that will help Connecticut deal with climate change and increase our climate resiliency too. So here are, I laid this out a bit earlier, but here are the ways that restrictive zoning hurts the environment. By encouraging sprawl through excessive provisions of single family zoning, we're pushing into open space and destroying farmlands and forests, which negatively impact our food production capacity and our ability to also enjoy.
Good luck, let me know.
Again and see what goes.
Okay, so I'm not sending.
Oh, sorry about that. I think somebody had their microphone on. But as I was saying, you know, by destroying our farmlands and forests, we're not only preventing ourselves from enjoying Connecticut's green spaces, we're also hurting our kids' ability to live in Connecticut and our grandkids too. And that's really difficult. We shouldn't be doing that. We also see that various studies from Harvard and NYU's Furman Center for Development showed that carbon emissions are nearly twice as high in zip codes with restrictive zoning requirements that prevent multifamily homes, which are denser and thereby more efficient from being developed. And it's not that we hate single family homes, it's just we want to offer more environmentally friendly options for people to live in. And as I mentioned, single family homes are just far less energy efficient than scale multifamily homes. This isn't to say that we should stop building single family homes, far from it. We know that this is an option that many people need. It's just that we need to start thinking of housing diversity and what other kinds of housing we can provide to people that's greener than the status quo. So here's a brief collection that talks about environmental racism too. We see that asthma rates in California are higher in California's historically redlined communities. And I'm sure the same is true in Connecticut, though we haven't had the research to back that up. And we see through things like DesegregateCT zoning atlas that housing for BIPOC communities has been concentrated in areas with higher air pollution rates, which is the main reason why we have a racial gap with respect to asthma rates. You know, Black and brown communities are far more likely to develop asthma because of all of the pollutants and the harmful particulates in the air. And as I mentioned before, Connecticut is one of the most racially segregated states in America. just driving through our communities, seeing the lack of diversity in suburbs like my own, like Simsbury, Connecticut, is evidence for this, as is evidence that shows we've actually increased in segregation since the 70s because of our failure to develop more homes and more multifamily homes. As we mentioned, asthma remains a huge problem in Connecticut, and we very clearly see the racial disparities within emergency room visits. Black people and Latinos are far more likely to visit the ER or the hospital in asthma cases, and we see that our asthma rates in Connecticut are higher than the national average. We attribute this in part to our restrictive zoning that concentrates minority communities within neighborhoods with higher emissions, higher harmful particulates, and this has to change. Now, here's a brief snapshot from the Yukon Clear Center's land cover. This is a glimpse of where we are losing land cover, where we're losing forests. And from 1985 to 2015, we've lost a significant amount of our green spaces shown within the red. And we know that if we keep on doing the same thing that we have been since 1985, this pattern will continue. And we're ready to stop it with you tonight. To curb sprawl that pushes into our forests, our wetlands, Connecticut's green spaces, we firmly believe we need to build housing where it already exists, to develop in places like our main streets, around our transit centers. So we're not building housing by all the time by bulldozing and cutting down trees and moving into our natural spaces, but instead concentrating housing where it already exists, where development's already there that can actually support that type of housing. So I want to get into parking requirements too. These are things that have really, this is a policy that's really negatively impacted our sprawl rates in Connecticut. So just a brief background, last session we passed a bill called Public Act 2129 that put a cap on these parking mandates, though towns are allowed to opt out of them. Parking mandates are requirements that force developers to build a certain number of parking spaces per unit. There have been instances where just for a simple studio apartment, developers have been required to build 3 parking spaces just for that one studio apartment. I don't know about you. I don't know many people who are living in studio apartments who have 3 cars. I think that sure is a rarity. And it is done oftentimes with the express purpose to make it more difficult to develop that kind of housing. And I'll also say it has negative environmental effects because it encourages car dependency and it paves over more of our green spaces. So we know that we cap with Public Act 2129, we cap town parking mandates at 1 per studio apartment or 1 bedroom apartment or accessory dwelling unit, and 2 per 2 bedroom or more. And we thought that this was a very reasonable, common sense step in the right direction for making Connecticut greener. This reduces sprawl and mitigates the heat island effect, where asphalt attracts more heat from the sun and heats up communities, especially urban inner city communities. And it also moves Connecticut away from car dependency. So now minimum lot sizes. I'd like to hand it over to Emily so she can discuss minimum lot sizes and how overly burdensome minimum lot sizes negatively impact Connecticut.
Yeah, so interesting presentation so far. Thank you, Kevin. So as for minimum lot sizes, that's one of our 2 proposals that we are really talking about this legislative session. So this is something that is extremely important, and many people in Connecticut don't know this. So firstly, as for lot sizes in Connecticut, above 90% of the land in Connecticut is zoned so that it's a single family lot of 1 acre or more. So some of these lots can be like the size of a football field for just one family. And just think about how unreasonable that is. And if we're, thinking about the environment and consuming our precious forest and our precious farmland, one family does not need that much land. So we consider these to be burdensome, and we're trying to come up with more sensible minimum lot sizes. So a minimum lot size is going to require a certain amount of land per home. And the larger the required lot, the fewer number of homes that can be built. So like I said, many are as much as an acre right now. We would like to reduce that. As I said, Kevin has the stat there. So 81% of residential land requires a 9.2 acres per home. So you can check out our zoning atlas. It's on our site. You can, I said 90, it's 81, but you can see that that's a large portion of the state that's requiring a huge portion of land per home. And 49% of residential land requires 1.84 acres. That's a huge, try and visualize 1.84 acres. And think about how much forest we're consuming just for one family, and think about how we can, develop more densely and preserve some of our forest resources.
Yeah, and I'll say that 1.84 acres is almost a football field and a half. And I don't know many people who want that much space. If they do, they're free to buy homes like that. But we're proposing that developers not be forced to build homes like that. And I did see a question in the chat from Sheila. Aren't the areas that have increased asthma rates have lots of multifamily homes? Very interesting point. And yes, that's true. The fact of the matter is that our restrictive zoning makes it such that all affordable housing is concentrated within these small pockets where asthma rates are higher, because emissions are higher, because there are more harmful particulates there, because those areas have more of a car dependency too. So what we are saying is that if we build more affordable housing and just housing in general all across the state, we believe that this problem will be mitigated. And I hope that answers your question. Feel free to send another chat if you would like more of an explanation there.
Yeah, and when there are, negative environmental effects, they're typically seen, the results are seen disproportionately in the same communities, even if they're not the communities that are doing the wrong thing.
Yes, I am. I have it. Thank you.
Are born in those, same communities. So yeah, just another environmental justice point. So I want to bring up the idea of transit towns because it's on this page. And so transit town we're considering is a town that has either like a fast track or a CT rail station in it. And there's over 40 transit towns. Of 10 of them require large minimum lot sizes for single family homes on at least 50% of their land near at least one of their stations. And this starts to get into one of our next proposals, but we're arguing that the most multifamily housing in the denser side of housing should be nearby our train stations so that people that live there can take advantage of the existing public transportation resources to get to work, to get to places that they want to be without necessarily needing to rely on their car all the time. So there are so many different effects of large minimum lot sizes. The first one being that they're expensive. As Kevin said, if it's a football field and a half, you're going to pay for that. So if you don't need all of that land, it's an extra cost. Infrastructure costs 20 to 40% higher. It costs more to bring electricity, internet, water, sewer into those large lot neighborhoods. Not only is the house itself less energy efficient as a multifamily house, but just getting all the resources to all these places, that's one of the results of that suburban sprawl. And you guys are really focused on food and food supply chain, and think about the way that a lot that big, if we continue to develop that way, will eat into our precious natural resources. And this stat is really important. Between 1985 and 2010, Connecticut lost 15% of its agricultural land and 6.5% of its forests. So if we're concerned about climate change and things like that, we have to think about sensible density versus spreading further and further away and sending people out driving, further distances and on larger lots. And we are not insane to say this. There are other states that are proposing things like this. Vermont had bipartisan support on a minimum lot size bill that proposed something quite similar to what we're going to be pushing this legislative session, allowing more single family homes, particularly around transit stations, but also encouraging developers to have the opportunity to develop on smaller lot sizes. So something to visualize here, an eighth of an acre, we can have 15 units. So correct me if I'm wrong on that, Kevin, but it doesn't necessarily mean, a giant apartment complex is going to plop into your neighborhood. This is, a series of different types of houses. We have duplexes, we have, triplexes, maybe a single family house, and a lot of trees still. So this is something that's very viable, but just not being done because until this, no one's been pushing for some of these sensible reforms. And like I said, Vermont has done this, and it's where the public sewer and water infrastructure already exists. When I'm having conversations with town planners, which is something that I seem to do a lot of their concerns are about public sewer and water infrastructure. They're like, oh, it's not going to work for our town because of this. And our proposal is taking that into account. So also, like I said, with the picture, 1/8 of an acre. So sounds small, but when you think about 1.84 acres being a football field and a half, you realize that that's a great size. And it allows for more spaces to be forest, allows for more spaces to be farmland, or even a park for you and all the other people on your acre to be able to share in those resources that are not taken over by large lot sizes. So environmentally sensitive lands. And we created a whole issue brief on this, as well as many other topics. So check out our site, check out the issue brief, and you can kind of go through and see more of the research that we've done. And there's a lot more of the like visualizations that you saw on the other page to kind of help you put into perspective what this looks like. So definitely go check that out.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Emily. Really appreciate that. And we hope that you, like Emily said, check out our issue brief. We've got more of our methodology there. And we hope that you'll find it interesting because, zoning has such an important connection, of course, with land, which is the foundation for the environment. We feel very strongly that by reforming minimum lot sizes, similar to Vermont's proposal, we can do a lot to stop sprawl and to really stop the degradation of our farmlands and our forests. So now I want to talk about a lack of development around transit stations. So as Emily mentioned before, there are 40 transit towns within the state of Connecticut with at least one train or CT fast track station. We're proposing that we zone areas around these train stations for, as of right, development of small scale multifamily homes, like duplexes and things of that nature. We firmly believe that our current development strategy of pushing further and further into Connecticut's green spaces is unsustainable, not only with respect to food security, but also with respect to climate change, also with respect to car dependency. And just by locating housing around public transit, you're going to be able to create housing that is able to support people without cars who might want to use the train or the bus to get to work on any given day. And this will do a lot to get our emissions in our state down and make us a leader in the fight to put an end and mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. So as I mentioned before, we're just not developing enough around our transit centers. And, forgive me for being a little passionate, but this makes me so frustrated. They're the perfect places for us to develop. And it breaks my heart to see the current development strategy of pushing further and further into our farmlands. So we've done a lot of research on this, and we found that 32 out of 40, a prohibitive majority of the transit towns, make multifamily homes hard to build near transit stations by excessive permitting, by extremely long and drawn out public hearing processes. We firmly believe that this has to change, and by pulling together, we can change it. 15 of these transit towns just straight up do not allow any as of right multifamily housing around those transit stations. Some of those names might be familiar to you. If you've taken public transit within Connecticut, you're probably familiar with the fact that what surrounds a lot of the public transit in our state is just parking lots. It might not be a whole lot of development. It might just be parking lots or empty lots. And this just proves that we're underutilizing the space around a place where development already exists. And just the idea of empty parking lots around public transit is just a little sad when we ought to be encouraging people to use public transit, in fact, more. So to sum it all up, instead of encouraging walkable communities where you don't need a car to get around and thereby can decrease your own impact on the environment, we're requiring sprawl. We're requiring car dependency. We got to change that. So here's a brief snapshot of how New Rochelle's unanimous 2016 transit-oriented development proposal brought about the development of more homes. And I'll just go through a couple of buildings that they've developed. Of course, this is not what we're proposing in Connecticut, development of high rises. We're for small scale multifamily homes, but we just wanted to show you the fact that these were put up within 3 years. And the fact is that if we act quickly, we can start to severely mitigate the loss of our farmlands and our forests. So I want to, to give you an accurate image of what we're proposing, the Republican governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, and his House and Senate recently just almost unanimously passed a transit-oriented development bill that's very similar to what we're proposing. And we have a rendering of this here. This is a very, moderate proposal that doesn't really impact the architectural character of any given town. And we believe that it's something called gentle density. You see the beautiful natural aspect of Connecticut through the trees intermingling within duplexes and townhomes. And these are very incremental steps that we can take with a huge payoff. And we hope you join us in advocating for these common sense, environmentally sound proposals. We believe that we can actually move away from car dependency and move to a more public transit-based transportation system and move away from sprawl with our proposal, equitable transit-oriented communities, which I'll talk about now. So we've got more info on our site where we discuss our proposal in detail, but the gist of it is that around a 10-minute walk of transit stations, we'd propose that half of that area, about half a mile, be zoned for as of right small scale multifamily homes, such as duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, things of that nature. And we believe by concentrating that around public transit, we can do a lot to alleviate the environmental burden that's on Connecticut. Now, some ways for you to get involved. We firmly believe that if you're interested in this, you ought to attend and speak at your local meetings. Go talk to your local elected officials, your mayor, your town council, and members of your land use commissions too. They ought to hear from you if you're for environmentally sensible development that does not push into your town's green spaces. We believe that this is a way for organizing your community for change. Bring some of your friends, bring some folks within your town or city, and go speak to your zoning commission. The people who are showing up right now are not for, in all cases, responsible development, and we can change that together. And we believe that you should write to the paper too. If you feel strongly about what we've talked about today, please get in touch with us. We'll leave our, Emily just put her email in the chat, and please reach out to her if you're interested in getting involved in any of these bullet points. We also have this link here, desegregatect.org/be-the-change, which directs you to our playbooks for getting involved, and gives people very concrete advice and steps they can take for getting involved in the fight for a greener development strategy for Connecticut that protects our farmlands and our forests. So now I want to open it up to comments and questions. I know that we've been talking for a while, and I want to engage in a dialogue with you folks. And I do see that there have been a couple of comments in the chat. Nancy is correct that there are new apartment buildings being built into the train stations in Milford and New Haven. That's correct. Other states are already, other municipalities in Connecticut are already taking the lead on this. There's a town called Derby that's also building housing around their transit. New Britain is doing this too. West Hartford is doing this. We're simply proposing that more towns be given the opportunity to do this. So feel free to raise your hand or put more, questions in the chat if you have any.
So Kevin, I think I'll start if nobody else has a question. In Orange, and I'm sure you're aware of this, we are one of the towns with restrictive zoning laws and minimum lot sizes, and neighboring community Woodbridge is the same. And in recent years, and I'm sure you're seeing this elsewhere, large open spaces have come up for sale with towns purchasing them to have a better control over what happens with those spaces. Would your position be that those spaces should be preserved or that they should be developed?
So great question. And I know that, a lot of people have very strong opinions on this. We don't really weigh in on those open space decisions. We firmly believe in a municipality's right to determine what open spaces ought to be purchased for preservation and what open spaces ought to be made open for development. We're proposing, statewide solutions to our housing crisis, but we recognize that different municipalities have different needs. Right now, we're focused on advocating for a development where it already exists. One, I think, important point is that all of this stuff, it's a very case by case, case specific proposition, the acquisition of open spaces, and we will leave that to the local communities to figure that out. Though we're of course concerned when people falsely claim preservation status for something that's quite obviously not really meritorious of preservation, just to prevent the development. And Emily, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I was going to say that the ways in which that we will get involved in something that's going on locally is if your town was proposing a development and it involved a bunch of multifamily housing and stuff like that, we would encourage residents in your town via email or newsletter to show up and support that development. But when it comes to an open space, we wouldn't typically advocate. However, if residents are coming to us and saying like there's a historical site in our town that they're thinking of turning into some new housing, we will obviously back them. And please, anyone here, be in touch if you hear about something happening at your planning and zoning commission that you think would create more housing in your town. I will do what I can to leverage making that happen and organizing around that. And beyond that, we don't want to overstep.
Thank you for that question. So I see a question from Debbie concerning about whether the more dense development will have laws to be sure not to clear cut the existing trees to build housing. One thing I'll say is we are definitely very intentionally trying to not put too many mandates in place on those municipalities. We're certainly encouraging as an organization to make sure that developments are environmentally sustainable. We are very familiar with the fact that in places where denser housing exists traditionally, there just isn't enough shade around for folks to enjoy. This can cause negative health inequities too. We'd encourage you, if your town is one of the towns that would be affected by transit-oriented development, as in our proposal, to make it very clear within your local provisions to prevent towns from prevent developers, that is, from clear cutting existing trees. And one thing I'll also say is, once again, it is a very town by town specific proposition there. Certain towns have different needs, and we firmly expect, by the way, that municipalities will step up and make sure the developments will proceed in an environmentally sustainable manner if people keep on coming out and organizing to those local municipal meetings.
I think we have another question in the chat. Have the existing developments been restricted for certain ages? Are children included, and how has it affected the schools?
So great question. I'll give a brief answer to this and hand it off to Emily. I know she knows a lot about this. So we're not proposing any age restrictions be put on these developments. That's of course up for towns to decide at their discretion. One thing I will say is that in a lot of Connecticut's communities, affordable housing is restricted to seniors only. We think that's a problem. And with respect to the school system, we also see this as a solution to the declining enrollment rates that are happening across the state in both our cities and our suburbs. It's been happening for the past 12 years. We don't see a whole lot of people doing anything about it. So we want to step up, make sure that more people with young families and young kids are coming to our state so we can fill our schools again, make sure our public teachers are safe and protected, and that our communities really have a future with kids going through their schools.
Yeah, and I will say in last session's proposal about accessory dwelling units, a lot of the issues with accessory apartments across the state is that they were just restricted to relatives or elderly folks. And we had said, anyone would be able to benefit from the wonderful affordability of an accessory apartment. And that goes for multifamily housing, affordable housing, or transit-oriented developments. When we allow people of all ages and incomes to have housing, it creates, not only fills our schools but it creates diversity in our schools, and it creates, the kind of school system that, so many of us are looking for, where everyone's from a different background. And I think that diverse housing brings diversity, and that's the most exciting part about these proposals to me. So yeah, obviously towns can make decisions and we respect towns, but when it comes to accessory apartments, we really wanted them to be open to everyone. And I believe that the same thing applies for any other proposals that we would put forward.
So really what your proposal is overall is just, simply eliminate these restrictive minimum lot sizes. There's no other restrictions that you would, want to keep in place or impose, or, it's simply just eliminating this minimum lot size requirement.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be gone completely. Understandably, we're talking about like 1/8 of an acre. So a lot of towns, like mentioned in the chat, like Bridgeport, this might actually be smaller than that. And also this doesn't apply to all the land in the state, just those with public sewers too. So it's not like everywhere there's just going to be no minimum lot size. It's like 1/8 of an acre, and then with the public sewer and water. So eliminating some of those burdensome restrictions that prevent more gentle density is the main goal here. But obviously it's okay to have some restrictions in place. We don't want to eliminate that completely because towns deserve that.
Sure, thanks.
Then I see a question from Amara in the chat that I think, Emily, you could answer with your local organizing experience.
Yeah, so in terms of how it came about, that might actually be better for Kevin, but this organization did start in 2020 in the summer. A lot of people were talking about racial justice issues and things like that. And, this organization realized that there is, so much inequality embedded in zoning and land use in the history of redlining in this country. And since then, we have tackled environmental issues and economic issues, as well as those racial justice issues. And I feel like we have been really successful on top of last year's legislative success. Locally, since then, we've really been trying to make sure that the law that we worked so hard to pass at the state level has been implemented successfully at the town level. So I talked about accessory apartments, and towns had an option to opt in or out of those requirements, as well as the parking requirements. And a lot of towns said, we don't want the state telling us what to do with accessory apartments, and chose to opt out. So I've been having advocacy at the town level, trying to convince towns and people to mobilize and opt in. And that has happened in various towns across the state, including Fairfield, Old Saybrook, and we have a list at this point, but we've been tracking them as well. But while there have been, I'll say, few that have opted in, there have been countless who have opted out and then put in place accessory apartments regulations that very closely mirror the ones that we had at state level. They just didn't want to say that we're stuck with the state, but then they put in place things that very much allowed accessory apartments as of right, meaning without a public hearing. So as of now in Connecticut, if you have not opted out, which I am not 100% sure of the status of Trumbull or Orange, but I can check our tracker. you can build an accessory apartment right now without having a meeting of your town planning and zoning commission, detached or attached, not, for relatives or anyone. You can just do it. And that's huge because that's a way that you can create an affordable housing unit of your own, right? So, on your own property. And being able to mobilize for that at various town meetings has been extremely successful in starting those conversations across the state. And on, smaller scale, not related to the state law, just little things like, this town is having a hearing about a new multifamily housing unit. Okay, great. We're going to be there in some sense and make sure that, we're supporting it. So those sorts of efforts have all been like extremely successful.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And I'll just add a bit to that. Emily pretty much covered it all. I just wanted to provide, she mentioned that some towns are opting out and just amending their ADU regulations. My hometown of Simsbury is one of those towns. Our zoning commission unfortunately opted out of our proposal. But I'm currently working with the Board of Selectmen to craft something that is a bit more individual at the town level that they feel addresses their concerns while expanding ADU accessibility. So just because these towns opted out doesn't mean that they can't take steps to become more inclusive for anybody who needs to benefit from that type of development. And by the way, an accessory dwelling unit is an apartment that is housed within a larger single family home. It could be, like a converted garage of the third floor of a home that functions as its own living unit. Very popular for, young people, seniors who need to live with their adult children, or members of the IDD community, the intellectually developmentally disabled community, who might need to live with a caregiver, but still wants an independent lifestyle. And we see that just the simple fact of instead of building a new home, converting part of an existing home into a new home, we believe that is a very effective development strategy as well.
Yeah, a lot of towns allow them already, but required a special hearing, and some just didn't allow them at all. So that's a huge success that so many more towns now allow them. You can just build it whenever. So that's a huge victory.
We have another question in the chat. Are you affiliated with the Open Communities Alliance? They're the group that challenged Woodbridge last year to allow more multifamily housing.
So great question. As of now, we're not affiliated with the Open Communities Alliance, though we know we have many allies and supporters in common. We both believe that we need to expand affordable housing access within Connecticut, as well as create more efficient and affordable development strategies.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I'd like to ask a question. My name is Bettina. I think the attitude that you're going to run up against is that with more sprawl and bigger lots, it's a healthier life. It's more environmentally friendly. How can you have bigger density and have it be better for the environment? So that's kind of my question to you. I can see that. I can see how greater density can be better in many ways. But it's hard to see for a lot of people.
Bettina, thank you so much for your question about that. And I'm gonna have Kevin speak to this as well, but I just wanted to, look at the environmental angle, like you said. And I understand when people think density, they think city and they think pollution, and I hear you. And what I think is important to think about is that in Connecticut, we understand that high rises and things like that are not what we're talking about. It's gentle density, and it involves not taking up more space for less people. So more space meaning more forests, more farmland. So leaving more land untouched by allowing people to live in a denser area, so that maybe on the weekend they can go out for a walk in the forest rather than having the forest be cleared and that's their front yard. So yeah, that's just like the simple explanation of it. And some of our issue briefs and our visuals will help people understand that. And it's a conversation that we have to have. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Kevin.
Yeah, Bettina, once again, thank you for your question. And we have, as you mentioned, run into a lot of opposition on those grounds. And what we've told to them, as Emily said, all of those points, of course, stand. We also say, these multifamily homes are simply more, because they're denser, energy efficient than the alternative single family homes. So not only are you saving on energy costs, you're also doing good for the environment. That's a win for you and the win for the planet too. That seems to get a lot of positive reception whenever we bring that up. I'll also say that the fact of the matter is that we see smaller lot sizes in Connecticut in places like West Hartford and other suburbs too. And we see that because people have visited these places, they know that they're pleasant places to live. They know that people in West Hartford still have plenty of access to green spaces, to trees, and to all of the environmental benefits that really that sets Connecticut apart from the rest of the union. And that's the messaging that we're using right now. If you have any suggestions, please feel free to let us know. Emily left her email in the chat. We're always looking for ways to improve our communication abilities to the people of Connecticut.
And of course, and the more that you spread, the more that you have to drive, right? So there's always the fact that the more sprawl, even if it seems like people are farther apart and they're in the wilderness, they're also driving more. So they are emitting those pollutants, and the more that we spread, the more highways that we need, and highways are a huge polluter. So it's those things that people don't immediately think of, but when we start talking about some of these sensible reforms, it does tend to click in. But yeah, so of course, email me if you have more comments.
Thank you.
Well, maybe just a slight plug for our series here. We have started this Dinner Disrupted series in order to engage in these conversations, because we've moved so much out of our everyday environment. And specifically, as they mentioned, food. We've really moved ourselves far away from the source that we need to live, to get by in our everyday lives. And if we have more space for the natural environment, we have a healthier ecosystem. At the same time, we have healthier soil, healthier air quality, and all of that benefits the food system, that we need to start thinking about how we're going to also move that closer to us. Because if everything is far away and our food is far away, we run the risk of not having enough, as you've seen at the grocery store when we can't get it in. Or if there's a climate crisis of a fire or a flood, then now suddenly we just don't have access to that. So if we can think about moving not just more denser neighborhoods, but our food closer to us and all of these sort of concepts, then we'll have a more sustainable future. And that's really the goal of our Dinner Disrupted series, to really engage people and start thinking about how we can affect changes for the future. And like they said, for our grandkids, for your grandkids, for generations from now, so they don't have to deal with what we're dealing with.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We highly encourage more people to show up. If you're watching this at home on TV, we highly encourage people to show up for Dinner Disrupted conversations. I've so enjoyed being part of this conversation, and hope to engage with in future events with you guys soon.
Yeah, I second that. Yeah, and everything that Amara said about just having those food sources closer to home. We're allowing for more farmland with these proposals, so we support that wholeheartedly.
Well, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, Amara, for organizing tonight's event. It was really great to hear more about how we might work toward, changing our zoning in Orange and our own communities at home, and work toward, greater resiliency in our climate. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. If you have any questions, please feel free to follow up with Kevin, with Emily, with Amara, with myself, and our recording will be available on the Case Memorial Library's YouTube channel, and I believe Amara will also be sharing it on the Trumbull Library YouTube channel, and it will be on Trumbull Local Access TV. So thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a great night, folks. Take care.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Emily. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.